Hey, welcome everybody. I'm Shannon Spasova. I'm from MSU, Michigan State. And we also have Evan Rubin, the other webinar coordinator from San Diego State. If you have any problems during the webinar, then you can chat to me and I can try to help you. As we get started, a few little notes about the webinar. So this is sponsored by IALLT, the International Association for Language Learning Technology. You can find out more at IALLT.org. We have a webinar series. It's approximately once a month. Everyone's welcome, and then recordings are a member benefit. We hope that you all consider joining IALLT because this is the way we're able to offer things like webinars. Some other things that we offer are the FLT mag, which just came out with a new issue recently, the LLTI listserv, and we have some other things that you can learn about on our website. For the webinar, we ask that you keep your microphone muted. It just helps to cut down on the background noise. If there's a time in the presentation when you can unmute your mic, we'll let you know. If you have any questions or comments, you can type them in the chat. And in order to open the chat, you just hover over your screen and then click the chat button, and then you can write whatever you want in that chat box. We often have really great conversations during the webinars. And then type any questions that you have, and I will keep track of those, and then we'll ask Nicole at an appropriate time in her presentation. So thanks so much, Nicole, for being here. I was thinking we should have some like strobe lights or something, be like, from the Harvard Language Center. Nicole Mills. We're going to be talking today about engagement and immersion in VR narratives. Thank you so much, Nicole, for being with us today.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I am really excited to be here to talk about a topic that has been turned into kind of an obsession over the past couple of years. And the uses and applications of VR, I think, are so the ideas language program at Harvard. So to begin, I would just like to, here I'm just going to move, if I can, hold on, move this down. I would like to talk to you a little bit about a conference that I went to, a festival that I went to in Paris in June 2019. It was called the New Image Festival in Paris. And at this festival, artists, filmmakers, and media specialists got together to discuss new formats of reality, virtual worlds, and the power of immersive content. Vicky Dobbs-Beck, who was an executive at Lucasfilms, the ILM-X Lab, talked about how we can move from storytelling to story living through the power of presence in immersive technologies. One of the experiences that I got to try was being a part of one of the Star Wars stories by actually feeling as if I was standing in front of Darth Vader in virtual reality, holding my lightsaber and sort of being a character in the story, which was very, very powerful and actually quite frightening to stand in front of Darth Vader. Another person that presented at this festival was Zila Watson, who's the editorial lead for digital storytelling projects at the BBC. And she talked about how virtual worlds enhance traditional journalism by allowing users to feel as if they're living experiences. And when journalists are really trying to share and document stories and events in the world that are happening today, VR just gives that additional visceral element that she felt was very powerful in journalism. Sarah Ellis, who's the director of digital development at the Royal Shakespeare Theatre, talked about how immersive content allows theater enthusiasts to go places that they couldn't go before by blending the digital and the real world. So you can see her on the left, this is the Tempest. You see a real actor on the right-hand side with a visual body or ghost sort of interacting with the real actor. Then Hsien-Hsien Huang, who's a new media creator and artist, talked about how artists can now create virtual worlds and invite audiences to walk into their art. And this was a collaboration with Laurie Anderson called Chalk Room. And it's a virtual reality work in which the reader flies through this enormous structure made of words drawings and stories. And once you enter, you're sort of free to roam and fly. And they say, quote, the words sail through the air as emails. They fall into dust and they form and they reform, end quote. An amazing experience to be able to sort of walk through words. Roel Amit, who's the head of digital and multimedia at the Grand Palais in Paris, talked about how immersive technologies are creating a new design of attention. So the emergence of immersive content is clearly raising questions in diverse fields about how we can design experiences to engage participants and involve audiences in really unique and different ways. So what's the power of immersive content in the teaching of languages and cultures? I think there are so many powerful ways in which VR can enhance the teaching of languages and cultures. One is that it can expand classroom boundaries. It provides meaningful opportunities for cultural immersion, deep contextualization, hyper contextualization. You make connections to the real world in ways in which you couldn't do in a 2D environment. And you do this through multiple sensory modalities: hearing, feeling, sensing, seeing, visualizing, experiencing. And there's research that shows that students develop deep connections with course content. They can alter their perceptions, their attitudes, and they can learn complex information that isn't necessarily as accessible in real-world contexts. They can experience new or novel places, practices, and events, things that they wouldn't necessarily even be invited to or have the option to experience if they were in that real world. And through this, VR has this potential for heightened and sustained engagement in learning. And there's research that shows how immersion and engagement can become intrinsically linked if instructors thoughtfully align carefully constructed goals with sound pedagogy. And that's really, really important, that we're thinking very thoughtfully and carefully about not only how we're designing the VR experience, but how we're implementing the VR experience in the classroom with really thoughtful pedagogy. So there's a volume coming out in, I want to say probably 2020. It's edited by Phil Hiver, Sarah Mercer, and Ali Al-Huri. And in the call for chapters, the title of the volume is Engagement in the Second Language Classroom. They said that engagement is one of the hottest research topics in the field of educational psychology, and has recently emerged as a topic of interest in language education. So the idea is that there's this consensus that engagement is a major key to academic success. So how do we promote it? And then also how do we evaluate it? And that was a big focus of the engagement volume. So research in the psychology of language learning on engagement talks about how engagement can happen in a wide variety of interactions, from the optimal to the less optimal. So optimal engagement happens when learners are focused, persistent, on task, challenged, curious, involved. And engagement has often been described as a multifaceted construct with interrelated and interdependent characteristics. So it's not a static construct, it's multifaceted, with multiple things happening at the same time. Philp and Duquesne, though, they came up with 4 dimensions that they believe engagement holds: cognitive dimensions, behavioral, emotional, and social. So if we think about cognitive engagement, when students are cognitively engaged, they can make connections, justify arguments, reason, exchange ideas, answer questions, solve problems, notice or observe phenomena, and then maybe afterwards make some really thoughtful reflection. Things that encourage cognitive engagement are really intriguing topics or themes that really compel the learners to go further and go dig deeper. And so when students are cognitively engaged, they use questions, they use connectors, they use phrases that express opinion like I think, or they'll say, in particular, let me give you an example, or they'll express different conflicting viewpoints. So I believe this, but on the other hand, I might also think this, or I disagree with someone else, etc. Behavioral engagement is when students pay attention, they focus, and they extend effort, and they persist. And in order to encourage behavioral engagement in the class, you really have to think about having clear instructions and explicit objectives. And this is where scaffolding and breaking things down into accessible steps. So taking something complex and breaking it down into pieces. And then indicators of that are students' attention is really highly focused. Social engagement, as you can imagine, we're all language teachers. Students interact, they explain ideas, they collaborate, they participate. And as we all know, what encourages social engagement is clear feedback, respecting opinions, providing follow-up feedback on student responses, soliciting further input. When students are socially engaged, they enjoy the activity, they feel supported, they listen attentively to others. And finally, emotional engagement. And when students are emotionally engaged, they show interest and they really find pleasure in tasks. They feel deep connections to the materials because they find them valuable, meaningful, and significant, or really just inherently interesting. So these are tasks that have relevance to the real world or relevance to the students' lives in some ways. They encourage students to explore, discover, make choices. They provide autonomy. And students, indicators of this are students show and express excitement and pleasure. So to come back to virtual reality and the applications in which we've been, experimenting with in the classroom, the course that we use is Beginning French 2, and now the new title is Paris in Virtual Reality. In this particular course, we have a variety of course themes. The overarching question that guides this course and sort of a thread that runs through the course from the beginning to the end is, what does it mean to be Parisian? So at the beginning of the semester, we talk about the diversity of Paris, the discussion of what it means to be Parisian, that we then move to a discussion of lodging and housing in Paris. Of course, always connected to particular targeted grammatical and vocabulary objectives that we have for the course. It's a Beginning French 2 course, of course. So that's very important. The following theme is the quarters of Paris. So we explore a variety of quarters, the Marais, Montmartre, Latin Quarter, Belleville, the 11e, La République. And another theme is Les Beaux-Arts, so fine arts, La Fête de la Musique in Paris, theater, La Comédie Française, art and surrealism and modern art at the Centre Pompidou, graffiti in Paris. And finally, the last unit is on media and representation of Paris in current events and in the media. Most recently, we had a discussion of Gilets jaunes and the Yellow Vest movement, and previously we've had discussions of the Paris attacks in November 2015. So how this course is framed is the students are told that they're engaging in a simulation of life in Paris, and we tell them that as they explore Parisian culture in the class, they will engage in this online simulation and they will create a French-speaking character and write from his or her perspective throughout the course of the semester. They're all living in the 11e arrondissement that I've highlighted here on the right-hand side. And at the intersection of the 10th, the 3rd, and the 11th, you will find the La Place de la République, which is centered right here. And this is a symbolic place because La République Française, the French Republic. We also see, this is also a place where many gatherings take place, strikes take place, mournings take place. You also see that Marianne, who's a symbol of France, is also sort of standing as a statue, is here as well. So to give you some ideas about the development of La République, which is the VR project attached to this course, we received a IALLT grant, that's the Harvard Initiative for Learning and Teaching, in 2017, 2018. This project was conducted in collaboration with Russ Gant, who's the director of the Visualization Research and Teaching Lab at Harvard, Wanda VR. And Wanda VR is a VR editing software company that is based in Paris. And Chris Dede, who is a professor at the Graduate School of Education at Harvard and the Technology Innovation and Education Program. So for this project, we casted and hired 4 different Parisians from the same quarter, La République, to document and share the stories of their lives with a VR camera over the course of 2 months. I went to Paris in November of 2017, and I interviewed possible participants in the 11e. So you can see a wide variety of different people of ages, backgrounds, professional backgrounds, actress, bartender, teacher, middle school student, etc. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. So the first person that was selected, I selected 4 people. One of them was Aude. She was 23 years old, lived in the 11e. She worked as a server at the Champs-Élysées, a very touristy area. She studied theater at the university and at the time was babysitting a 3.5-year-old girl. Her family lived in the suburbs, very talkative, friendly, outgoing. Her mother was English, her father was French. And I just thought she was someone that would really connect with the students. The students would enjoy learning about her life. Then Benoit was 25 years old. He was really a real true artist. He was a magician, an actor, a singer-songwriter. He was a tour guide of Hidden Paris. He was involved in theater, music. He was originally born in La Réunion. His father is Spanish, mother is French. And his family now lives in the Pyrenees, a town of 30 people. And he was a real creative, social, free-spirited type. Youssef, 33 years old. He was a filmmaker. Originally from Tunisia, and spent 2 to 3 months in Tunisia every year. He came to France at the age of 17 to study film, and he currently lived with his girlfriend, and he enjoyed the music scene in the 11e arrondissement. We had Lee. He was 11 years old. He was a native Parisian, family of 4, so we really got to showcase family life through Lee. He was a real curious, engaging, intelligent young boy. And developed the most authentic, real footage. We were really, really impressed by the footage that he developed for this program. So after they were selected, we had VR training. So Wanda VR, the company that was based in Paris, I brought over 360 cameras that were carefully prepared by Russ Gant, the director of the Visualization and Research and Teaching Lab. And I brought those over with me to France, gave them to Wanda VR, and they had a VR training session, which was basically, how do you use the camera? How do you use the tripod? What do you do about movement? What is the camera height? And then how do you look at the footage that you've actually captured while you were out, sort of capturing different facets of your life. Then we showed them how to download and upload footage, because we asked them to put the footage in a Dropbox folder every week and provide us with weekly updates. And then we provided weekly feedback. This happened a little bit over the holidays. Sometimes we didn't get as many updates as we would have wished, but eventually through time, it happened naturally, and that's what we really wanted to see in the end. We didn't want them to just capture just anything. We really wanted them to capture things that they found, represented who they were and who they were in a really authentic way. So these are some photos of some of the VR training experiences that they had. At the time, we were using a different type of headset that was a phone, and now we're using Oculus Go headsets or Oculus Quest headsets. Informed consent forms were a very important part of the process. We had to think about informed consent forms for France. So we contacted Wanda VR. They had particular forms that they had used in a variety of different other contexts. So we brought that back to the Harvard legal team, and we made sure that this was appropriate from our standpoint as well. So this was an important stage of the process. And anyone that was in the footage had to sign the informed consent form. So the editing goals, and these are things that we wanted to, that I talked to Wanda VR, because Wanda VR was in charge of the editing. Although Wanda VR is a very accessible and usable editing software, sort of like an iMovie for VR editing. But for this particular project, Wanda VR did the editing for us, which was unusual, but this is a way to showcase their excellent product. So in any case, we said, listen, we want to create 4 Parisian VR stories from 4 different Parisian perspectives. So how do 4 different Parisians who live in the same quarter experience the same space? We wanted to target cultural products and cultural practices, and then through voiceover and narration that we recorded later, insert, get some information about perspectives. And we also wanted to target postmodernist approaches to teaching culture. So thinking about culture as plural, as multiple. So not thinking about comparing culture A with culture B, but thinking about the plurality within one particular cultural context, and within the same city, and within the same quarter within the same city. So we wanted to create experiences that allowed students to envision and experience Paris through these extrasensory elements and really make them feel emotionally involved. That would then set the context for the rest of the semester because the students are simulating life in Paris. And then they were exposed naturally to authentic language use through transcribed voiceover, etc. So to give you an idea of the structure of La République and the VR program, this gives you a general idea of what it looks like when you enter. So when you first enter into the program, you enter and you see this welcome space. And this is a 360 space, of course. You see that La République is in the center. And as you look around, you can turn around in 360 and you can see the different people. You can see Lee on the right and you can see Aude on the left. But if you turn around and you turn your head around, you can see Benoit and you can see Youssef. And you could decide who you want to experience that particular day. So maybe you decide to look at Benoit through an eye gaze interface. You stare at Benoit and there's a little circle that opens up as if you were using a click of a mouse, and you get information about Benoit. And you find out that Benoit is 25 years old. He's originally from Spain, her Spanish origins. He's a magician. He's an actor, etc. Then you could decide one of two things. You can decide to lancer le film, which means sort of directly go into the film and experience his life in sequence, or you can decide to look at the agenda. Now, if you decide to lancer le film, you're going to see the introduction. So Benoit will introduce himself, and this introduction is a narrative voiceover, and it's transcribed. And you can see that each introduction comes from a different angle in terms of the camera. This is the angle at which Benoit's apartment faces La Place de la République. Now, if you decided to look at the agenda, you can look over here and you can look at the various clips linked to his life. So you could decide to go to Monday's clip and look at the music recording day. You could start to look at his theater performance. You can choose what you wanted to look at in a more curated way. At the end of all of the clips, there's a conclusion where Benoit sort of says goodbye, thank you for experiencing my life, etc. Also transcribed and with narrative voiceover. And finally, as you move through the experience, you're going to see that there are titles that sort of give you headings as to contextualize where you are. So you have an idea of where you are at each moment in time. So as I said, so there's different program features. There's voiceover narration with transcription, intermittent subtitles, interactive features. So you're going to see that we were just experimenting. We didn't really know what was going to work best. We didn't want to do the same thing for every single experience. We wanted to sort of play with different approaches and try different things out. And I'm going to show you some examples. So to start off, voiceover narration. And when I'm describing, I'm highlighting different facets of engagement that I feel are highlighted in this particular segment, but I feel that because of the multidimensional facets associated with engagement, that there are multiple things happening at the same time. But so sometimes I'll just target and focus on a few different things. So narrative voiceover was added to the VR segments with less conversation exchange. So you can see that Youssef is, I mentioned that he was a filmmaker. And so as a filmmaker, he was used to being behind the camera and not a part of the scene. And with 360 footage, you are always in the scene, unless you hide behind a tree or under a table. Because an important affordance of the VR experience is the ability to observe complex cultural phenomena, we didn't necessarily want to have consistent subtitles included because we thought that that would divert their attention from the careful observation within the 3D environment. So we wanted to also provide support to students who might need or prefer additional scaffolding, but we also wanted to have them the opportunity to actually turn it off and turn off the transcribed narration depending on their comprehension level or their interest. So let me show you what this looks like. try that again.
C'est un lieu parfait pour la flânerie, j'aime beaucoup m'y balader. Dès qu'on passe la porte d'entrée, on a le sentiment d'être dans une bulle hors du temps. Donc il y a des objets de différentes époques. Des objets de différentes époques se croisent.
Now I'm going to click
On peut-
on this. You can see
C'est un lieu parfait pour la flânerie, j'aime beaucoup m'y balader.
the
Dès
subtitles
qu'on
will
passe
pop
la
up in
porte
the
d'entrée, on a le sentiment d'être dans une bulle hors du temps.
You can see here that if you
Donc,
want
il y a
to look down, and
des
again,
objets
this
de
is all
différentes
for our
époques.
user interface. You can
Des
decide
objets
that
de
you wanna
différentes
skip
époques se
the
croisent.
next particular
On peut
sequence
imaginer mille.
and watch the next sequence with
Et pendant toute la journée, dans la cour, on assiste à un vrai ballet des camions de cinéma
You can also look
qui
down and
viennent
decide you
récupérer
want
et
to go back to the
emporter
main
les
menu.
décors
And
vers
if you want to
différents
go back
plateaux
to
de
the main
tournage.
menu, you can click here. And you can decide to look at the menu and decide which one of these clips that you would like to experience. We asked each participant to actually create a real setup of what their real week would look like, so everything felt really authentic within the experience. So that's an example of how you can sort of turn on and off the subtitles. But what was interesting about what I was just showing you with Steph is that let me, if I can go back to it. This is a particular
Donc là, on est chez Lanzani Décor. C'est l'un de mes lieux préférés dans le quartier. C'est vraiment à 5 minutes à pied de la maison. Quand on marche dans la rue en fait où se trouvent les locaux de Lanzani, on arrive devant un immense portail et qui donne sur une cour pavée comme ça, très ancienne. Donc c'est vraiment un lieu qui redonne vie à des époques passées. Tout de suite, dès qu'on passe devant la porte d'entrée, on est curieux de voir ce que contient cette.
So let me get
Hey,
back.
Nicole, I just wanted to mention that when it's playing, it's hard to hear you. So if you
Oh,
wanted
it
to
is?
so we could hear part of it, but if you wanted to repeat anything that was essential of what you said, because I could hear the video louder than you. So
Okay, yeah. I'm trying to remember what I said. Okay, yeah. So no, but one of the things that I was mentioning was that this particular space was a very unique space. This was a place where people went, or filmmakers went, to choose objects for their set. So this is a unique space that language learners may never potentially have the opportunity to experience, even if they were to go abroad. So this was a unique place to be able to explore and develop. And the idea of looking at these really interesting and unique objects and the different activities you could develop with the students to potentially imagine what Youssef's next film might be. So let me. So another experience is with voiceover narration and transcription. This is in a scene which focuses on emotional engagement because of the opportunity for students to be able to make choices within the immersive experience. So at Aude's birthday party, Aude is the 20-something-year-old young girl who has a birthday party in her studio apartment. Learners can choose to immerse themselves in the ambiance of the party and feel as if they're socializing and mingling among party guests as they dance beside them. But if learners want to get more information about the guests, they can select the targeted pin above the guests using their eye gaze interface. The party then pauses and Aude provides a narrated description of the party guest with transcribed voiceover for scaffolded support. So let me show you that.
La fête bat son plein pour mon anniversaire. Ce soir, j'ai 24 ans et mes amis comptent bien me le rappeler. Bienvenue dans ma soirée.
J'ai filmé un peu avec un micro, je n'avais pas filmé. Les coulisses.
Juste, faut pas toucher à ça, quoi.
Le grand garçon que tu vois, c'est mon meilleur pote. Ensemble, on fait du sport, on pleure comme des enfants devant les films d'amour, on boit des cafés interminables en refaisant le monde, on écrit des scénarios catastrophiques, on fait des bras de fer, bref, j'en passe. Peu importe où je suis, il ne sera jamais très loin. Le grand garçon que tu
So to give you an idea, so there was a little bit of a technical glitch with that. You couldn't experience it. It usually felt more natural. I think there was some stunting with the video, but you really, when you're in the VR experience, you really feel like you're at the party. I mean, to the point where we had some students feel as if they start dancing at the party. They feel it. You also feel like you're bumping into people. You feel like you're not necessarily a fly on the wall, you're actually there experiencing it with those people. So you can see that I decided to choose and to click on one of the people, and here she describes, so this is Aude, and she's describing who this is. So she says, so this tall guy that you see, it's my best friend, together we play sports, we cry like kids when we're watching love stories, love films. We drink these huge coffees and trying to recreate the world, and no matter where I am, he's never very far away. So that's sort of a little narrative that she might describe about him. And there's 4 other people that you could learn more about if you want. In addition, as I mentioned, I think a really important affordance of the VR experience is the ability to observe and observe complex cultural phenomena, potentially. Because of that, I felt that consistent subtitles should not be included because they could really divert students' attention from what we really want them to do, which is observe and carefully observe in the 3D environment. Another question that came up as we were developing this was, well, where do you put the subtitles? It's 3D. So we had to choose one place to put the subtitles, but I mean, if you're looking behind you, you might not necessarily see them. So in this particular scene, we have Lee, the 11-year-old boy, with his grandmother, and they're driving in a car, and his little brother is sitting in the back seat. And we wanted to have intermittent subtitles so that students might have the opportunity to just sort of catch what was happening and what the conversation was about, because the conversation was actually quite interesting, because Lee, as an 11-year-old boy, was asking his grandmother about, I think it was the last exhibit that she went to and the theater performance that she went to over the weekend. And it was a really sort of intellectual conversation for an 11-year-old to have. So we wanted to make sure that they were paying attention to that. And we also, at the same time, targeting that emotional engagement piece, wanted them to really observe and experience the ride in the car. Because as they were driving, you could look out the windows and you could see and see Paris. So let me show you that.
Le soleil qui apparaît. Aujourd'hui, on va au CAM, notre club de tennis à Montrouge. C'est en dehors de Paris. On est tous les mercredis, on y va. Et aujourd'hui, on est mercredi, donc on y va. Moi, mon cours de tennis, il est à 2h de l'après-midi. Et celui de mon petit frère qui...
So Apologies on that. I'm thinking there's some sort of technical difficulty or some sort of, the video is not working right now. But I think you can get the general idea that it is natural video, it's not static. And you could look out the window as they're driving down the streets and see the different experiences and to see the different parts of Paris and the architecture. And as they're going, actually, Lee was a great storyteller and he was a great narrator. So he would always talk about what he was seeing and what he was doing, which was fantastic, especially at his level of language that he would use in the descriptions was very accessible to the students. So then, also other things that were included were interactive features. So the idea that we wanted them to sort of enjoy this experience, we wanted them to have control of that experience. We also wanted to make sure things were very clear. So there was emotional engagement was targeted through, the opportunity for choice. We also had behavioral engagement, which was targeted by, you can see, very carefully scaffolded and placed things that were very obvious. The students didn't need to necessarily think too hard about what we were trying to get them to do in the experience. We would explain to them, look around you and interact in his apartment. And then through the question marks, they could play around with this experience. What is happening here is if the learners want to learn more about the information or a story behind the poster or the book or the computer in his apartment, for example, they can select the object using an eye gaze interface. You can see there's this question mark connected to it. And after they select the object, they can hear Benoit narrate the humorous story of the computer that he had the good fortune of picking up off the street as an irritated girlfriend threw her boyfriend's belongings out the window. So if they select the poster, they can hear Benoit passionately describing his acting role in a theatrical performance of Shakespeare. So the voiceover narration is transcribed and visually made available to the students. And I think what's interesting about this is it's sort of like an actional immersion where the students can initiate actions within the virtual environment. And that really focuses and focuses their attention, and I think engages them further. So let me show you what that looks like. You can see that right now there is no sound here. This was one of the only experiences that we didn't use video. We just used a 360 photo. You see that this is Benoit's bachelor pad. You can look around if you'd like. So the students they could turn their head around using the VR headset and look at the different things. It's the poster. There's a book. Back here you can see the computer. And this is the funny story that he tells here.
C'est une histoire qui m'est arrivée il y a quelques semaines. Je me promenais dans la rue de la Roquette un après-midi et j'ai vu une femme qui jetait par la fenêtre des vêtements, une guitare, des assiettes. Je me suis approché et j'ai vu un homme qui se tenait à côté de cette pile d'affaires, tentant visiblement de s'expliquer avec elle. Et coup de grâce de cette scène de rupture, cette femme a jeté du 4e étage son ordinateur qui s'est écrasé devant nous. L'homme est parti énervé en délaissant une grande partie de ses affaires. Je l'ai donc recueilli chez moi. L'ordinateur, pas l'homme.
So if you know anything about French, so he's telling a funny story about how he picks up this computer. This woman is throwing a pile of things out the window. Clearly it's a breakup scene, and I guess the man is standing next to this pile of objects on the sidewalk. Benoit comes over as the guy leaves and he picks up this computer and he brings it home with him. So it's this broken computer, but he brings it home. But what's particularly interesting about this story, if you're a French language instructor, is that it really thoughtfully, and I don't even think intentionally, incorporates the passé composé and the imparfait. It's a fantastic example if you wanted to have students analyze the past tenses. And so if you wanted to extract that particular text, put it on a piece of paper and have students analyze after they had experienced this, I think that could be an interesting activity to incorporate. So let me get back. So that's the experience itself. That gives you a general idea of some of the different types of experiences you might see in the VR program. But I think what's critical with VR is that you create engagement through instructional design. So the VR creation is just the first piece. The next piece is thinking carefully about your instructional design. So the first thing that we did with all of the experiences that we did, so if we were exploring Benoit's life in one particular session, we always started out with an introduction to the goals of the program in general, and an introduction to how to navigate the VR headset, the agenda, how to use the eye gaze interface, main menu, headset, volume control, and raise your hand if you had technical difficulties. This is a really important part because if there are issues with sort of these just simple things, then it provides hurdles in the experience. It actually is very intuitive. Once the students put the headset on, they get it, but they do need just a quick prompting as to how it works. Then we want to make sure they have the opportunity for that emotional engagement piece. So they have this personal control, opportunity for exploration, rewatch intriguing scenes, skip less appealing scenes. So there's always a piece where we can give them that opportunity to experience. So moving towards the sort of pedagogy of engagement, there were 4 characters, 4 days of instruction, 1 character for each day. And the teaching materials for each day included 4 distinct phases. They had a previewing phase, an immersive viewing phase, a focused viewing phase, and an analysis phase. In the previewing phase, students were asked to read the agenda, read the weekly agenda on the handout, make predictions about the character's identity, hypothesize the VR narrative content. Something they might say is they look at the agenda and they say, who is this character? What is his personality like? How does he spend his time? Right, so they're getting a general idea before they even see anything about who this is. Another idea for a previewing task could be that they're presented with the character's transcribed introduction on a piece of paper. The students then hypothesize the character's identity, discussing, questions in pairs and following up with large group discussion. Again, this piece of, connecting, activating their prior schemata with cognitive engagement and then socially engaging them, encouraging them to discuss and interact. The second phase was this immersive viewing phase, really focusing on really getting them to experience that life, really connect with who this person is. So emotional engagement occurs when learners feel that the topic is valuable, meaningful, interesting, tasks that are relevant to the real world. So in the immersive viewing phase, students read 3 reflection questions and then immerse themselves in the character's authentic world for 15 minutes. They can move forward, they can go back, they can rewatch. A sample instructions might say, now we will meet Benoit. Before beginning the virtual experience, here are some questions to keep in mind. So we might ask them a few general questions about his personality, background, relationships with others, identity. So big questions. Describe Benoit. What can you say about his personal life, his professional life, etc. You can allow the students at this phase to discover, to explore, to make choices, and they're given a lot of autonomy. You can also see that behavior engagement is encouraged by, we do include some parts in English to make sure the technical features are clear. We don't want to have them run into any problems with the technical features of what do they need to do. We want to make sure that's crystal clear. Choose Benoit, click lancer le film. If they didn't understand it, that it's listed here in English. We don't necessarily think that needs to be in French to confuse them. We also listed, you can see there's an icon with a VR headset icon to just showcase, okay, you're going to put the headset on now. Then focused viewing. So at this point, during the focused viewing phase, students rewatch selected short clips with targeted comprehension and observation questions. So they're not yet asked to analyze, but they're asked to collect data, observe the clips, collect information. What do you see? At this point, we're focusing their attention. So phase 2 is very open. Phase 3 is a bit more focused. It's a bit more curated. We're asking them to look at particular things. Again, you're going to see the VR headset is listed here. We also list the name of the clip we want them to watch. So we want them to watch the shorter clip. So go to the agenda, watch the shorter clip, and then we ask them particular shorter questions about their lives. So this is an example of Youssef. So for Youssef's VR experience, for example, the class is divided into 3 groups of 3 to 4 students. During phase 3, each group is asked to explore one facet of Youssef's life. So one group explored personal identity, one group explored professional identity, the third group explored social identity. So they each watched targeted clips within those overarching themes. And then they had particular guiding questions, and then they rewatched those clips and then reported back to the class afterwards, discussed in groups and partners, and then reported back to the class. And then the 4th phase of the lesson was the analysis phase. So now that they're using the collected data from the focused viewing phase, they have the opportunity to make hypotheses and analyze sort of this broader cultural context. So thoughtful discussion questions were introduced, sometimes accompanied by citations that would be thought-provoking, allowing students to think critically about their observations from phases 2 and 3. And the questions encouraged them to make connections, reason, justify arguments. We gave supporting prompts like, I think that, I find that, for example, in contrast. And small vocabulary boxes were also provided to help them express some of their thoughts. In the case of Benoit, students had explored the characteristics of his artist lifestyle in phase 3. So in phase 4, they were asked to discuss whether they believed that Benoit's daily life corresponded to their preconceptions of what a Parisian artist is in 2019. And then that was discussed in partners and then later in a large group with the guidance of the instructor. And then on day 5, on the last day, there's a culminating class discussion in which students synthesize the knowledge gained from the 4 Parisian narratives. So really focusing on this cognitive and social engagement, no VR on this last day. The students were participating in a comparative discussion of the diverse Parisian narratives with the support of a PowerPoint presentation and a handout. No high-tech things happening on this day. There's no VR immersion. They engage in a comparative analysis by comparing the homes, social encounters, daily routines of these 4 Parisians. So it becomes this sort of transcultural discussion. Sample phrases were encouraging them to express opinions, like I thought that, or preconceptions, I had the impression that. Students were then asked to return back to their initial cliches about Parisians and to discuss which stereotypes had been confirmed or contested through this experience. And then more open-ended questions about how where one lives may or may not influence his or her identity, and whether their definition of what it means to be Parisian has become more complex or hybrid or multiple. So you can see that this is sort of focusing on cognitive engagement, but also a lot on discussion and carefully scaffolded discussion with questions and prompts, etc. So some of the things that they compared were La Fête, so the party for Youssef, a 30-year-old, Aude, the 20-year-old in her small studio apartment, and Lee, who has a birthday party for his younger brother and does a magic trick for his younger brother at his birthday party. We had the diversification of Parisian culture with the apéro, the late afternoon, early evening drink that you might have with friends, family, etc. So Youssef with a few buddies at a cafe, Aude with a bottle of wine with her girlfriends talking about their recent dates and relationships. Lee, who is sitting, this is more of a goûter on a Sunday afternoon, but sitting with family, having tea and cookies in the afternoon, late afternoon. And we also have Benoit, who's at a cafe with about 20 other people coming in and out, a real sort of interactive experience, people saying hello, goodbye, kissing each other, etc. We also had diversification of the apartment. What is an apartment in Parisian culture? We had the couple's apartment. We had Aude in the studio apartment. We had Lee, who was living in a larger apartment for families. And we had Benoit with his bachelor pad. We also saw different kinds of transportation. We saw Youssef on the metro, Youssef and Camille on the bus, and Lee in the car. and le petit déjeuner breakfast. So we see Youssef preparing breakfast for his girlfriend, and Aude going to the local cafe and standing at the cafe bar and talking with, you know, her friends and people that she knows in the neighborhood, something that she does every morning. So that's an example of what we have done with that particular unit in the Paris and virtual reality course. Another thing that we've experimented in this course is how we can integrate and talk about current events and media in the course. So came up with a different model, and it was sort of a 4-stage approach to engagement-driven VR pedagogy on the yellow vest movement, and this happened last spring. A new unit was developed, and we had 2 days prior to the VR day, which happened on the 3rd day. We had the previous 2 days, we developed new materials, exploring, describing, analyzing, and discussing news articles, graffiti, social media posts, and photos associated with the yellow vest movement. The grammatical structure at the time was the conditional and the hypothetical structures, which worked really nicely. So in the first phase, we made it very clear what we were planning to do. And this is a really, really critical phase, I think, in VR. When you're going to use VR, is that students need to know what they're going to do and how it's going to happen. So we established the goals of the lesson, we talked about the procedure, we talked about the different phases, what we're going to do first, second, third, and fourth. Then we were lucky to have Virginie Green, who's a French literature professor who was teaching a course at the time on revolutions in French history. She came and she gave a presentation about the yellow vest movement and its relationship to various revolutions in French history. She did this presentation in English with some key words in French. And the idea was really to sort of cognitively engage the students, give them a general background, give them a deeper background understanding, maybe something they wouldn't be able to understand in French, but we wanted them to get that content. The next phase was to immerse students in the streets of Paris during various yellow vest protests. So we found a real yellow vest movement participant who had a 360 camera and had extensive footage of his experience walking through the streets of Paris during the protests. So we were able to immerse the students in that experience and get the feeling of what it might like to be a person protesting. We also provided them with a few scaffolding questions. You always want to have some guiding questions before they start this. You want to say, well, how does this feel? What are you noticing? How does this particular experience make you feel? What particular things are you seeing in the experience? What we did with this is we used something called VisBit, which allows you to all watch the VR experience at the same time, and the teacher can control it. So you can stop and start the experience as you wish, and you can actually interject comments if you'd like. And then lastly, we had an interactive Skype discussion in French at the end. Students had prepared questions for homework with 2 yellow vest protesters, 18 and 22 years old, who were part of the movement. And we gave the students the opportunity to interact in real time with these 2 yellow vest participants. So I just recently finished a chapter for the volume on engagement in second language, in the second language classroom. And I talked a lot about the importance of, pedagogically driven VR experiences. So let me just read you a quote from the end of this chapter. So I said, if we carefully design teaching materials aligned with engagement theory and research, VR immersion engagement have the potential to become intrinsically linked. VR instructional design that models a theory meets practice orientation can establish an important foundation for the measurement and analysis of learner engagement in the L2 classroom. Data collection and analysis can then provide constructive information to further refine and enhance the instructional materials toward optimal engagement. Without a theory meets practice orientation, however, VR could quickly turn into a fun classroom frill that quickly loses its pedagogical appeal among SLA scholars and practitioners. interactive, narrative-driven VR experiences with thoughtful attention to engaged instructional design will allow our foreign language learners to go from simply learning about a culture to living and critically engaging with the culture in the classroom. So this is something that I think is really key. So thinking about the design of the VR experiences, and then next, your pedagogical experiences, the pedagogical design, the instructional design, the teaching materials, how you're going to do this, and from which theoretical and research standpoint you're going to ground your materials is very, very, very important. Then I think the next phase, which I'm going to be doing in spring of 2020, is collect data. In this time, I'm going to be collecting data on the construct of engagement to see whether or not the materials and how they were designed actually have the outcomes that I had actually envisioned. So that's happening in spring of 2020. So to be continued. So some future directions in course and curricular design for me on my plate, what I'm interested in is for the Parisian virtual reality course. We just changed the title. We're going to have, again, we're going to do the same thing. We start off the semester with the Paris VR Narrative Project. We're going to continue with the Yellow Vest Movement discussions this semester. And then next semester, what I'd like to do is add to our surrealist art, our fine arts unit, I want to add a tilt brush experience in which the students are first immersed in different surrealist art pieces. They're able to look at them from a variety of different angles. And after that, use tilt brush to be able to create surrealist art in VR, export it, describe it, and then analyze the works of their classmates. In the Beginning French 1 course called Cross-Cultural Encounters in French, I had a collaboration with the Office of International Education, and Harvard Study Abroad students this last summer took 2 360 cameras abroad with them, and they documented their experiences while abroad. One person in Aix-en-Provence and another in Dakar, and a graduate student in Mauritius. And I would like to bring these experiences to the course, so showcasing to the students, Harvard students experiencing other cultures abroad to sort of inspire and motivate our beginning language students to study abroad, hopefully. So yeah, and anyway, I have these two, well, I have one publication that's in preparation, hope to finish that soon and submit it, and I have the forthcoming publication happening in the engagement volume. And thank you. It's been my pleasure to share this project with you and my experiences with you. It's been really something I've enjoyed, and I hope to hear other people's experiences and what other people are doing with VR.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Some really, really interesting projects. I have a couple things to ask you before we start on questions. One is, would you be able to stay an extra 5 minutes so that we can get to a few more of the questions? It's almost 3 o'clock now. Would you be able to?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. You have so many interesting things to share. And then the other question, in case, a couple other things, in case people have to leave soon, I think there were some people asking whether you would be able to share the PowerPoint, and would they be able to contact you, and what would be your preferred way for them to do that if they can for that?
If
or
they'd like to contact me, they can, yeah, my email, actually I can, do you want me to, I'll go back to that initial slide that has my email on it.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. And while she's doing that, I'm just gonna, for anyone who has to go right away, I just want to share with you what's going to be the next webinar, and I have the registration link. It's going to be an update on our previous webinar on H5P and Anvil. It's going to be Jessica Miller, Jeff Magato, and me talking about those 2 topics. So please sign up for those and share so that others will know. Okay, so I'm going to type your email address in the chat in just a moment, but people, if they have follow-up questions that we don't get to, they can email you there, because I don't think we're going to get to all the questions. Great. Okay. So my first question, and then I will allow some people to type in more if they have some, but I do have some saved, is I was wondering how this fit into the bigger curriculum in the sense that I wondered if, was this a course that students could choose, but they could choose another course in its place? I just wondered because I know some people are not into VR or it makes them uncomfortable. And so I wondered, was this kind of an optional course or something that could replace another one?
No, it's not, but it's beginning French 2. So there's only one beginning French 2.
So how did you deal with it or how would you if there were a person who found it uncomfortable to do VR?
Well, I think when people are uncomfortable with VR, often it's because the footage, when I have found that people have been uncomfortable with VR, it's because the footage makes them dizzy because the footage isn't carefully, it's shaky, it's not captured correctly. So I haven't found, again, the whole class isn't in VR. We have the initial unit, which is 3 days in VR at the beginning of the semester. And then we have at the end of the semester, we have one session with the yellow vest movement. And then we will have one more session. So we will have a total of 5 sessions that incorporate VR. So it's not the entire class, whereas they're doing this all the time. So no, this is the only option. And I found that by incorporating this at the beginning of the semester, it gives them sort of a way and a lens from which they can view Parisian culture, which feels a bit more authentic. So we're asking them in the course to develop a character. As I said, it's a global simulation course. So they have to develop a character who lives in the 11th arrondissement, and they live all in the same building in the 11th arrondissement. So to imagine what that might be a little bit challenging or a bit of a stretch. But now having these 3 days, or if at the beginning of the semester where they immerse themselves in the different people's lives, they really have a lens that is a grounding for the rest of the semester. It's also happening during shopping week at Harvard, and shopping week at Harvard is famous for students don't have to choose until the second week of class. So it's a little bit of a difficult week to navigate. So it's sort of a time where you can do some experimental or different kinds of things in class.
Okay, great. So another question here is, there are kind of 2 interlocking questions that are, I think, related. What are the key components to the underlying VR platform for the development of the VR? And what was the experience of the creators? How hard was it to learn the platform? How hard was it to edit? I think you said someone else did the editing. Is this something one could create quickly, or would it take significant ramp up? Sounds like it takes a long time to me, but you can let us know.
Well, no, I mean, I think you can capture footage, and you can capture footage with a 360 camera. The biggest hurdle that you might face is just getting the editing software. Once you have the editing software, it's sort of like an iMovie. Now we had some fancier things because we did have some graphic design work that was included, which that would be an additional cost or additional hurdle. But I think you can do a lot of these things as you would with iMovie with Wanda VR. Maybe not as, with all the bells and whistles, but you certainly can do that. Also, another thing to think of is there's so much VR footage that's available online. If you're on YouTube, you can look and find 360 footage that's already been captured and already been edited. Newspaper websites have tons of VR footage now. I mentioned that the BBC has a lot of VR applications, New York Times as well. So that would be an amazing thing to do. Find VR footage that has already been captured and use that. And then maybe you could edit that. You can download it, edit it, adding some, hot spots and some interactive features and some subtitling, etc.
Another question is, how are you going to measure engagement? And I guess this is referring to what you were talking about, your project starting next semester.
Yeah, so we are going to do that to start off with, there are a variety of ways that you can measure engagement, a variety of layers, but for us, just for the first phase, we're going to start with Likert scale items that are adapted from the Philp Duquesne 2016 4 dimensions of engagement, and we're going to tap at the 4 different phases of the lesson and the experience that they've had, and ask them questions about how, whether or not they were engaged from a social, cognitive, behavioral, or emotional standpoint. On Likert scale items, we'll also have open-ended items, and we might also have some interviews afterwards also with students about their experiences. We're also going to repeat again for the other 4-phase approach that we use with the yellow vest. We're going to do a similar approach in terms of gathering data about the various facets of engagement using Likert scale, open-ended questions and interviews. And we think if all goes well and we can make sure that the tilt brush experience happens for the surrealist art unit, we will also focus on gathering data about engagement within that experience as well.
I'm just going to ask one last question. Sorry to those whose questions didn't have time, but one last question is, what are your thoughts on accommodating students with visual disabilities?
That's so interesting, because we had, the first time we did this, we had a student that was taking the course. At the time, the course was entitled Exploring Parisian Identity Through Visual Media. And we had a student that was taking the course that was blind. So we were thinking, wow, how are we going to do this? But it was really fascinating because the experience has so much sound incorporated. We were able to partner students where one student would focus on the visual, where she focused more carefully and listened more attentively to the sound and to the language within the experience, whereas the other student focused more attentively on the visual. And so when they had their follow-up discussions, it became a really rich and interesting discussion because of what they were focusing on in the experience. So we were able to make that happen and maybe make that work in a really productive way.
Thanks again so much, Nicole, for sharing your experiences and expertise with us on this topic today. We really appreciate it.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure.
And by the way, everyone's saying cool stuff and thank you and enriching and thank you in the chat in case you can't see it.
Okay, great. No, I can't see it, but that's nice. Thank you.